As Vegeta's space pod makes it to planet Freeza number 79, we are given our first glances into Vegeta's world. First off, whenever we've seen a space pod land from interstellar travel, it always smashes into the ground, creating a huge crater. It doesn't seem a very practical design choice if they were to routinely travel between their own planets, so I like that Toriyama makes up these landing pads that seem to absorb all the shock. It's just one of those little details I really enjoy that seems so natural I don't think I've really thought about it before. And I promise I'm not going into a big spiel about exposition again, but there is so much new information on display. We see other alien types, but they're all wearing the same armor that up until now we've only seen on Saiyans. Vegeta is put in some kind of healing capsule which quickly heals his wounds. While that might take some influence from The Empire Strikes Back, it's something new for Dragon Ball. And we see how people treat him, with fear and respect mostly, but aside from the Doctor mentioning his armor is rubber, we really aren't explicitly told anything. We don't have a subordinate saying, "Oh, here comes Vegeta, my superior and head of the 10th Battalion of Frieza's forces, Frieza being the person we all serve. Let's get him into a healing capsule which uses a blend of 11 herbs and spices to heal even the nastiest of wounds in a short amount of time." We're just dropped into it and learn how it works by observing. Now, a lot of fans of science fiction and fantasy are into learning as much as possible of what's known as world building, all the elements that make up a fictional universe. That's why there are so many tech manuals and guidebooks for franchises like this. And yes, crafting a fleshed out world is integral to understanding it and making it compelling. But I see so many people give passes to terrible stories under the justification of, "Oh, but the world building made it so worth it." Now, everyone has their own opinion, and if that's yours, that's fine. If it brings you joy, that's great. But in my mind, storytelling trumps superfluous detail. World building can definitely enhance a story, but it can't save a bad one. And it's certainly no substitute for having a story. As in, if a narrative work is made up of nothing but details of a society or character background information rather than actually telling a story, Dragon Ball minus, I'm probably not going to like it. And just like in the first part, I say all this to establish that this is world building done well. It's what's necessary to establish the threats our heroes will face and outline the trajectory for Vegeta's development in this arc. It's there to be absorbed, but it doesn't take over the story or draw unnecessary attention to itself. It's seasoning, not the entree. Now, we've seen people like the Grunts and the Doctor groveling over Vegeta to establish that he wasn't just full of crap when he was bragging about how awesome he is. But now we get the flip side of that in the form of QE. We're going to learn that he has been Vegeta's equal in strength. In other words, this guy could have come to Earth and smashed things up just as effectively as Vegeta did, but he just looks like some crappy random henchman. This dork can make fun of the science losses on Earth and even the deaths of Nappa and Raditz, and all Vegeta does is grimace a little bit. Vegeta may be a force to be reckoned with, but this demonstrates he's far from the top of the totem pole. Well, aside from laying into Vegeta, QE is also here to gloatingly inform him that their boss, Freeza, overheard Vegeta on the Scouters talking about Planet Namek's Dragon Balls, and has taken a team to find them and wish for immortality for himself. And I have to admit I do find that a bit amusing. Vegeta and Nappa had used that little trick to find out about the Dragon Balls and go to Earth in the first place, and now his boss has done the same thing to him. So Vegeta runs off to Planet Namek to get the Dragon Balls before Freeza does. The scene with QE is clearly a rewriting of Vegeta. In the Saiyan arc, Vegeta and Nappa appear to act with complete autonomy, or at the very least think nothing of leaving a subjugated planet to take a year-long trip to Earth. Vegeta declares himself the strongest being in existence, and they say they want to wish for immortality simply so they can enjoy battle forever. Now, however, their trip to Earth is said to have been against orders. Vegeta's barely the strongest person in this room, and Vegeta desires immortality so he can overthrow Freeza. Now, I'm not saying that anything is really directly contradicted here. Vegeta's line can be hand-waved as him bragging, and clearly, unless Toriyama was going to end the series at the conclusion of the Saiyan arc, there was going to be someone stronger than Vegeta. But while Toriyama did throw in a veiled reference to Frieza at the end of the Saiyan arc, it's almost certain the idea had never crossed his mind when he was first coming up with the motivation for the Saiyans. And that's okay. You really just have to fudge those details ever so slightly to make it work, and the results are very much worth it, turning Vegeta from just another evil guy to pose a threat into a much more dynamic character with a much more interesting history and motivation. Even though we haven't met Frieza, we now know our heroes are walking into a three-way competition for the Dragon Balls, surrounded on all sides by people who happily would and easily could kill them. And while Vegeta is going to be working against the main bad guy, that doesn't make him any less dangerous to the good guys. The series has never really done a story of competing bad guys before, but I think it's a brilliant idea. This also does a good job of setting up what a force to be reckoned with Frieza is, since even Vegeta is scared of him to the point that he feels he needs eternal life just to be able to stand up to him. And here's a subtler indication. Remember when Nappa bragged that Vegeta was so strong he was named for their home planet? Well, Freeza has the distinction of sharing his name with planets too, except in his case, you'd probably need an encyclopedia to keep track of all of them. Remember, Freeza number 79. I also want to mention that the Doctor tells Vegeta they weren't able to grow his tail back, but Vegeta assures him it'll grow back on its own. You know, sometimes I get the feeling that writers like to do this stuff, have characters refer to things that are never going to happen, just to keep the fans from asking about them. You know, if Toriyama had had the Doctor say the tail is never going to grow back, even if he gave a reason, you'd have people writing and complaining about it. But by having Vegeta instead say it will grow back, then those same fans will just sit back and await its return. It's like the author and fan equivalent of waiting for Godot. I think I first came to this realization as a kid when I was watching Boy Meets World. In the second season, the kids start high school, but they had to do something about their ever-present teacher, Mr. Feeney, because, typically teachers don't follow you from school to school. So they established that he has become the principal of the high school. But maybe that was a bit too difficult a pill to swallow, so to ease it down, he says he's just acting principal. And he mentions it, one more time. And then it's never brought up again. He's just the principal, and he stays employed in that capacity for the remainder of the show's duration in high school. So too does Vegeta say, "Oh yes, my tail will definitely grow back." And then not only does it never come back, but despite how sure he is here, he never even mentions it again. Now, I've weighed in on the subject of tails before, but since the last time I did, Toriyama has actually addressed the subject. In the 30th anniversary Super History book, he says in regards to Goku, "I'm always thinking about how things are supposed to work, so it was a real pain to figure out how he'd put his pants on or stuff like that. That's what always bugged me most. Is there a hole in the pants? Does he put his tail through first, then put the pants on? So that made me want to just get rid of the darn thing, which I did in the end." So apparently, Toriyama got rid of tails because pants confused him. I find that kind of puzzling, since I can think of 2 instances off the top of my head where characters address how Goku's clothes work with his tail. And putting a tail in pants is not exactly a difficult problem to deal with anyway. At least not nearly as difficult as the idea that with what we know of battle powers and the established 10 times strength increase and the Saiyan transformation, 1 full moon is all it would take for a tailed Vegeta to wipe out nearly all of Frieza's forces. But no, Vegeta's tail will never grow back, and neither will Gohan's, and so the Saiyan arc is the last we will see of the Saiyan Great Ape form in the manga. After the passing of a month, the heroes finally reach their destination, so allow me to welcome you to Planet Lazy. Namek is introduced in full color, so you can see how its green skies and blue grass make it appropriately alien. But aside from that, which is only a rare occurrence in the manga, there's not much of interest here. Krillin and Gohan comment that it's like the place where they fought the Saiyans, and that is pretty apt, because this planet exists for no other reason than for people to fight on it. So there is almost no civilization, culture, architecture, art, or people. As Kaio had said, there were only about 100 people on the entire planet to begin with, and that number is quickly dwindling. There are no climate regions or weather of any kind. Every area looks exactly the same. The whole planet is just grassy islands with rocky outcroppings and a few trees. And later on, the narration will inform us that the planet has 3 suns, so it's always going to be daytime. Now, forgive me for being cynical. Maybe you'd call it world building. I call it incredibly convenient, because I'm convinced the only reason we get that tidbit is so Toriyama can be, lazy. He doesn't have to worry about inking in night skies, and in the midst of various factions flying all around the planet, he never has to worry about where they are in relation to each other, or ever think about the passage of time in general. Planet Namek is not a planet, it's a big MMA arena with Dragon Balls hidden on it. Well, we have to work in one last joke to indicate that our heroes are too stupid for outer space, so Bluma freaks out when Gohan and Krillin just step outside of the ship before she's even tested the oxygen content in the atmosphere. But since she's the comedically uptight one, and it wouldn't be conducive for fighting if they spent the entire story in spacesuits, the atmosphere is perfectly suited for them. That said, they aren't there for more than a few seconds before finding out the rest of the planet is not perfectly suited for them, as they see the space pods of Vegeta and Q.E. land, and before long 2 of Frieza's weak scouts come upon them. Krillin and Gohan immediately assess they are of no consequence, and those little laser blasters on their arms indicate they don't even use their own ki. So this is why I find what happens a little strange. Now, when we are presented with threats, we have what is known as a fight or flight response, as in we either seek shelter from danger or combat it. Many animal species have defensive posturing to make themselves look more intimidating. Cats, for example, arch their backs to look larger. But for some reason, Cranidian's plan is to suppress their ki and make the bad guys think they're weak. Now, for much of this arc, they're going to use this skill to hide from powers much, much greater than theirs, and that makes sense. It's the flight part. But here, well, let's just say if they weren't so ready to make themselves look so pathetic, the scouts fear they might just run away, they might not have just so casually blown up their ship. Good plan, Baldy. But then again, the strategy might have its merits as we turn back to Vegeta. Huey has followed him to the planet on Frieza's orders to take him out, and they've always been of equal strength. But in a bit more of added nuance to Vegeta, rather than being portrayed as a haughty elite who's above it all, he comes across as more of a soldier. While Frieza's men have rested on their laurels basking in the rewards of being part of a planet-conquering empire, Vegeta's been the one actually out there conquering planets and getting far stronger as a result. And in particular, his time on Earth around beings who can raise and lower their battle powers caused him to realize he can do it too. And so he easily and brutally kills Huey. But I guess this also solidifies for me why I find Cranidian's use of this plan so unnecessary. Vegeta hides his power just to make Huey crap his pants before killing him. Vegeta ends up killing him with no effort at all, so it's not like he needs to lull him into a false sense of security. He just does it to twist the knife, so to speak. Cranidian and Gohan have no such vendetta against these guys, and, well, if you're doing the same underhanded things as the murdering psychopath, you may want to rethink your strategies. You know, especially when it leads to getting you and your friends stranded on a planet that, by conventional means of travel, is 1,000 years away from your home. Freeza and his subordinates have been following Vegeta's battle on their scouters, so they know that he is at large and coming after their Dragon Balls. They've just collected their 4th Dragon Ball and are moving on to the 5th, which means there really isn't going to be that much of a Dragon Ball hunt, since most of them are already together. But that's okay, because this is going to be less about finding them and much more about them changing hands. And yeah, it's going to have to be plural hands, because these things are just giant, which is going to make collecting them and hiding them all the more difficult. No stashing them in a backpack this time around. Gohan, Cranidian, and Bluma take refuge in a cave, and not a second too soon because Frieza and his entourage fly past them on their way to the next Dragon Ball. And apparently Frieza's ki is so immense that just being close to it almost sends them into panic attacks. Upon noticing that all the Dragon Balls are grouped around that ki, they realize their simple jaunt to collect the Dragon Balls has become an almost impossible quest. There's no way they're going to be able to defeat these guys. However, they do have one advantage, and that's their ability to suppress their ki enough to not be tracked by the scouters, a very smart application of ki control. So Gohan and Cranidian follow after them to the next Namekian village to see just what these guys are up to. I mean, hey, after all, maybe they're really nice people.